Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the content patch for the 14th of October 2013. My name is TotalBiscuit with today's gaming news and comment. Coming up in the show, Valve unleashes a demonstration of the Steam controller, Activision buys itself from Vivendi, and we'll be looking at the forthcoming games for this week. All this in the OC Remix track of the day is coming your way right about now. Valve has put out its first video demonstration of its forthcoming Steam controller, which showcases various games including Civilization 5, Papers, Please, and Counter-Strike Go. The demonstration's a few minutes long, you can see it running in the background right there. I'd suggest that you go and watch it because the commentary is very useful as well and explains how the actual controller is mapped for various different games. Now, I've got to say, after watching this, I'm a little less confident in it than I was previously. A lot of people seem to really like it, and were very interested in seeing how it worked, and it really converted them to the idea that this could be a good thing. But to me, it only really demonstrates the limitations that I thought this thing would have in the first place. So, controlling something like Portal, everything seems to be just fine, yeah, because it operates like your standard twin-stick controller. There is nothing unusual about that whatsoever. So that seems to work. Obviously, it's going to take a little bit of practice there, and you've got some interesting flicking motions, actually, that I noticed with that you can't really do necessarily with a stick that allow you to... It almost seems like you can get a little bit of momentum going without your finger actually being on the pad itself. So you can sort of flick it, which will give you a bit of spin momentum, which could potentially be useful, as opposed to having to hold down the stick. So that might be cool for first-person shooters. But then you move on to stuff like Civilization 5, and the whole idea of, oh, it's a trackpad, really comes sharply back into focus. You notice the controls on Civ 5 involve a lot of rolling your thumb, basically, along the trackpad, which is exactly the problem that trackpads generally have, and why they're not particularly good for games like this. Obviously, it depends really on the sensitivity, and Civ 5 does allow you to scale the UI to some degree, which should make playing it a little bit easier, but I definitely would say that this looks way more uncomfortable than the use of a mouse for something like Civilization 5. I don't want to use a trackpad. I've got trackpad on my laptop. It sucks. I've got a trackpad on my television remote. It sucks. It's a really poor way of controlling games. And unfortunately, it does appear like you've got similar problems there with Civilization 5. However, you are at least able to combine the two trackpads to have what is essentially map push, yeah, and then use your cursor, which is potentially a little easier, but this is very similar to how a lot of the older attempts at RTS and turn-based strategy actually worked on a console. Obviously, stuff like Civ Revolution was adapted in that respect, but if you tried to play those kind of games on a 360 pad, that is pretty much how it would look like and how it would feel. And that, to me, is a little bit concerning. Going on to Counter-Strike, you can definitely see that it is not as accurate, it's not as quick as a mouse and keyboard, which for any PC FPS fan that's playing something competitive, you're not going to convince them, I don't think. It takes a decent degree of time to line up headshots as opposed to what it would on a actual keyboard and mouse. So you're trying to convince people, I suppose, to get on the couch with this kind of game. I don't think that's going to happen. It may potentially be more comfortable than using a controller, but it's really hard to say because I don't know how experienced this guy actually is with the use of a controller. There are millions of people in the world that can play an FPS perfectly fine with a dual-stick controller. The thing about the Steam device is that the hurdle it's got to get over is to allow PC gamers to use a handheld controller like that, but still have a similar accuracy to keyboard and mouse. And if they cannot do that, then they are going to be in big trouble, because that defeats the purpose of the bloody thing to begin with. If it's going to be a similar struggle, then why don't I just use a traditional controller versus that? You know, why would I use Valve's controller? Then the final demonstration was Papers, Please, which actually wasn't too bad. I liked the demonstration of Papers, Please because it demonstrated that you could actually use both touchpads to accelerate your scrolling across the screen, and then only use one if you wanted more accuracy. That's an interesting idea. Yeah, that is actually pretty damn cool indeed. And it seems like a game like Papers, Please would work reasonably well with the controller, though, again, not as good as with a mouse and not as good as with a touchscreen. So right now, looking at it, considering they haven't really shown things like Meat Boy, it's a little bit difficult to determine just how good that would be. Obviously, the reactions to this have been positive because, hey, Valve, and there's also been a lot of silly kind of defense of this. There was a comment that I actually read where someone said, yeah, just like literally any thumbstick controller, and someone's like, no, nothing like it. Where's the explanation? I mean, if you have a look at the way that Portal works, you have a look at the way FPS works, it is very similar to the way a thumbstick controller actually operates, and therein lies the problem, because thumbstick controllers are not very good for those kind of games, and Valve is trying to convince us that this is a reasonable replacement for keyboard and mouse. And if you look at those motions and you watch the way that the control methods work, then I would say that currently it's not. It seems like with practice and with proper configuration, you may be able to get more accuracy out of it. And we are looking at someone that is extremely well practiced with it already. So if you look at, say, his Counter-Strike response times, that they're not bad, considering that there's no auto-aim on, but they're also not particularly great either. And you think, oh, this guy's practiced a lot with it. How much practice will it take for your average PC user to make the switch, assuming that he ever would? That's the hurdle, isn't it? And for me, it seems like I wouldn't use this controller for anything beyond what I would traditionally use a 360 pad for. And that is a failure of the design. That said, there's an awful lot of work to still be done with it, and who the hell knows how much better it's going to get, so shouldn't condemn it before the thing comes out, but I do feel that it's got a mountain to climb when it comes to saying to PC gamers, oh yeah, you should totally game on the couch. Oh, it's absolutely fine to use big picture mode, and here's our controller so that you can actually get the optimal experience. I have a comfortable chair, I have a nice desk, and a lot of monitors. It's going to take quite a lot to get me away from those things. After a failed attempted injunction to block the buyout, Activision Blizzard has successfully acquired enough shares to buy themselves from their parent company Vivendi. This essentially means that Activision Blizzard is now entirely independent. The transaction consisted of buying $8.2 billion worth of shares from Vivendi, which included 172 million shares, that being $2.34 billion, bought by a Bobby Kotick and Brian Kelly investment venture, those being the CEO and chairman of the company. This action comes after Vivendi's attempt in July to essentially take a large amount of money away from Activision Blizzard in order to try and pay down the company's massive debt in order to avoid a credit downgrade. The action that many described as a plundering at the time could have potentially had severe consequences for Activision Blizzard, so it looks like they took preemptive action in order to prevent that from happening. The question is, what does it mean for us as gamers? Well, it's an incredibly hard thing to say. And it really comes down to the idea that, frankly, we just don't know how many decisions were made over the past several years driven by Vivendi versus the guys from Activision Blizzard. You know, this buyout happened in 2007. It's been a while. And we've seen Activision do a great number of things in the meantime, some of which were most assuredly not positive. But where did that decision actually come from? We have to bear in mind that Bobby Kotick is still the CEO of Activision. He is not known as the most affable of people, and he is a very, very business-minded individual. He was able, I think, to get away from this image of being the dark overlord of gaming. There was that one year where he just came out with quote after quote after quote that were just really PR suicide, frankly. And lately, he has been able to avoid that simply by not talking, which is a very useful thing indeed. That, and he was overshadowed for several years by John Riccitiello when it comes to the most evil person in gaming stakes. Regardless, will this improve anything? We just don't know at this point. Activision already tossed away a lot of their franchises, yeah? They got rid of stuff like Brutal Legend, World in Conflict, Chronicles of Riddick. They got rid of even the 50 Cent games. By the way, 50 Cent Blood in the Sand, actually really fun. Just bear that in mind. They got rid of a lot of that stuff, and they really streamlined themselves and focused on the notion of yearly franchises, basically Call of Duty for the most part. And they've done very, very well for that. You know, they're sitting at like $4.8 billion in terms of revenue that was on the books by the time that Vivendi tried to take that money away from them. They have $14.2 billion worth of assets as of 2012. They are one of the most profitable companies in gaming. And of course, they have Blizzard on top of that with the WoW cash cow, which evidently is doing fairly well for them. And once Hearthstone comes out, it's probably going to end up doing even better. Does it mean that Activision will return to the glorious days of creating new franchises? Well, yeah, the last big one that they made was the Skylanders series, and they have every intention of continuing to milk that for as long as it goes. We are talking about the same guys who had control over Guitar Hero, of course, and milked the snot out of that one as well. And now, of course, that's a very dead genre. And no doubt the same thing will eventually happen with Skylanders. But where do they go from there? Right now they have a lot of skeleton developers, yeah? They shut down a lot of them, things like Bizarre Creations, Luxaflux, and things like that. They still have stuff like, say, Radical. Yeah? They have those, but there's barely anybody there. Yeah? There's been a lot of layoffs for Radical. The last game they made was, as you probably remember, Prototype 2. Supposedly, they're working on something which is codenamed Incredible Project. But aside from that, we don't know what's really going on there. Neversoft, the former Tony Hawk developers, they lost 50 staff in 2010, and the last game they released, if you don't count Tony Hawk's HD, is Guitar Hero Warriors of Rock, which came out in 2010, so 3 years ago. They gutted Ravensoft. The last real game they made was Singularity in 2010, so they've just been doing bits of work here and there on stuff for Call of Duty, like they helped with the DLC and parts of the user interface for Modern Warfare 3, for instance. What are they currently doing? We don't have a bloody clue. They hired actors for motion capture in January 2012, so basically a year and a half ago, but there's been no announcement of any game from them up to this point. So we have no idea if Raven is even still functional. And there's a bunch of studios like that. And you look at the other studios that they currently have, and they're currently working on franchise titles. They're working on another Spider-Man game. They're doing Amazing Spider-Man 2. They're working on more Spyro Skylander stuff. They're working on Call of Duty. What else is coming out from them? Well, aside from Blizzard, and we think they're working on Blizzard All-Stars right now as their priority, there's nothing exciting coming out of Activision. Will this change that? I have no idea. It's difficult to say just what this focus comes from, but I'm gonna say this is not the glorious revolution of Activision that perhaps a lot of people were hoping for. It's nice that they got away from a company that basically just wanted to plunder their success. It means that since they have a lot of money, they may be willing to take a few more risks. That's a possibility. But as it stands, we still have Bobby Kotick at the helm. He is a very business-minded individual, as should any CEO of a large company be. So it is hard to say if this will benefit us in any way. So we will just wait and see. If Singularity 2 gets announced tomorrow alongside Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5, then I will change my tune in a heartbeat. But I don't think that's going to happen. Alright, let's have a look at the forthcoming releases for this week, shall we? These are based, for the most part, on the US release dates, so bear in mind that they can vary. In the UK, games often come out on Friday, not Tuesday, and sometimes in Europe you get them on Thursday as well, so just bear that one in mind. Alright, so we'll start off with probably the biggest release of the week for the consoles. It's got to be Skylanders Swap Force, honestly, which is coming out on 360, PlayStation 3, 3DS, Wii, and Wii U. Yes, they're still making games for the Wii. Unsurprisingly, considering that that was a game that was very successful on the Nintendo Wii, so yeah, it makes sense that they would continue to actually release that. It's a massive franchise, as we were talking about earlier, and the particular gimmick this time around is that you can take the top half of the Skylander and connect it to a different bottom half, which means that you've got a bunch of different combinations. My kid actually plays this, and he likes it a lot. And it's actually kind of neat. I mean, for the most part, it's mostly kind of an action hack-and-slash RPG with some weird mini-games and things like that. It's not a bad-looking game, but my god, does it cost a lot to actually get all of the plastic nonsense for it. I'll tell you, when it comes down to mastery of plastic nonsense, I gotta say, Activision are the evil overlords of it, I've gotta say. We're seeing Talisman, a digital edition. That is the full game, by the way, instead of the sort of single-player weird thing that I played, oh god, it must have been maybe a year ago now, which wasn't really particularly good. So it's coming out to PC on October the 14th. It's a game adaptation of the board game. The board game, by the way, is very much a kind of roll the dice and enjoy the ride kind of thing. Strange I should talk about this now, because I actually played Relic last night with the family, which is a 40k-based kind of Talisman-ish game. It's just a bit better. Talisman is a game that can just drag on forever. That's the real problem with it. But the full version that actually has all the features and multiplayer is coming along your way, so that's always good. The early access version that was out some time ago didn't have the online multiplayer. Now it actually does, so yeah. They're looking to put expansions out for this. Honestly, like, the default set for Talisman is not that great. I would personally prefer to play it with the expansions, because they get a lot better at that point, but this will definitely give me an excuse to play Talisman again. It's very much a game from my childhood. So I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with it. It just seems to be a straight-up conversion of the board game. and I don't necessarily think it'll work that well on a computer, but we will see. Valhalla Knights 3 coming to PlayStation Vita on October the 15th. Valhalla Knights being a series that used to be on the PSP. It's not particularly well regarded. Yeah, the past couple of games that have come out for it have not been well reviewed at all. Not sure how this one's going to turn out. It's a 7-on-7 action RPG, which seems particularly interesting. I'd like to check it out, especially considering there's not much for the Vita right now. But the history of the series has not been great so far, unfortunately. However, it did come out in Japan a few months ago, and its Famitsu review was pretty good. The scores for that were 8.778, which is not bad at all. So it may very well actually be worth playing this time around. I think I'll pick it up and see how it goes. It sounds like an interesting concept, the 7-on-7 party brawls in real time. That's kind of neat. So we'll see whether or not that turns out to be any good. I hope it does. You know, I like XSEED. They're a cool developer, but they have a lot of misses as well as a decent number of hits. But at least they try new ideas every once in a while. I can appreciate that. We've got Cabela's African Adventures coming out for PlayStation 3, 360, and Wii on October the 15th. Yeah, if you're the audience for that, I think you already know. And we actually just have a bunch of tat coming this week, unfortunately. Stuff like the Pacific Rim game for PlayStation 3, it's already out for Xbox, and, you know, as much as I love the Pacific Rim movie, it's one of my favorite movies of this year, the game is just dreadful. So I wouldn't recommend that. Champion Jockey, G1 Jockey, and Gallop Racer for PlayStation 3. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire for PlayStation 3. We do have Tetrabot & Co. coming out for PC on October the 15th, which is a puzzle game by a company called Swing Swing Submarine. It should be interesting. I'll have a quick look at that one. But it's not the best week for games. Couple of titles coming out like Goodbye Deponia, if you happen to like the previous Deponia games. They are point and clicks. They're not too shabby. The Germans seem to like them an awful lot. That's coming out on October 18th for PC and Mac. And you've also got Mighty Switch Force 2 making its way to Wii U from the developer Way Forward, which may be okay. It's hard to say, really. We'll see. The original Mighty Switch Force has something of a cult following. Don't necessarily believe that it was an amazing game, but we'll see. So, yeah, fairly dry week. Kind of makes sense considering the Pokemon just came out as well. That was technically last week, but it came out on a Saturday for some reason, so I guess everyone's a little bit too busy playing that. And there's one other game that I just want to highlight called Bad Hotel, which is a hybrid of tower defense and a procedural music toy. You have to build your hotel by defending it with a series of sophisticated weaponry against an army of rats, yetis, and seagulls. It came out on iOS a little while ago, but I have code for this, and I think I've just got to play it because it sounds incredibly dumb. So I'm definitely going to try that one out. One other thing I should mention, which I don't even know if I should put it in with the games releases because it's very much an exploration kind of thing. It's Stanley Parable. That's actually coming out on October the 17th, which has a pretty interesting amount of hype behind it, considering it used to be a source mod. I should try and play it. It calls it an exploration game, which does remind me a little bit too much of Dear Esther, I suppose, but I will have a look into it. I don't want to prejudge it by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm told that it is a very narratively driven experience with a minimalistic gameplay. There we go, folks. That wraps up the content patch for today. Thank you very much for watching. Before I go, I'd like to give you the OC Remix track of the day, however, if you don't mind. So there was a very recent release that came out on OC Remix a few days ago that is by the remixer OA. I believe I've featured him on the show before. And it's a really nice medley that contains the Chun-Li theme and a theme of Sea Viper from Street Fighter 4, which is a nice little mix. I think it does a pretty good job of that, and as a direct result, you get this nice mix of kind of Asian theme and some really cool trance in there as well. It's nicely put together and well executed, so hopefully you'll enjoy it. It goes by the name of Street Fighter 2 Femme Fatale, so hopefully you enjoy this. You can download it in the description below this video, and I'll see you next time.